Hello, everyone, and welcome to This is Youthwork, Youthworkers React, which is the first of its kind, joined by three other people from across the sector who have willingly joined me to discuss the Senedd election results. I think it's worth saying that before the podcast starts, there's actually no government's actually been formed yet. That will form tomorrow, but we sort of know or have a clear indication of where it's likely to go. Everyone knows who I am, but I'm Darryl White, and I'm the Workforce Development Officer for the Youthwork sector in Wales, and also host a few of these podcasts to hopefully raise awareness of things that are happening in the Youthwork world. Also, just to have a bit of fun with some colleagues as well. So I'll go around my board. Beth, if I can start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I am Beth Gallagher. I am the Youth Voice and Communications Officer at End Homelessness Cymru. And I will take this opportunity to plug our podcast, AdRev, which is all about youth homelessness, that you can find wherever you get your podcasts as well.
Where can they find your podcast?
Wherever you get your podcast, it's on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, etc.
Okay, if we get the link, we'll chuck it on the description as well, so people can listen to yours as well. That'll be really good.
Thank you so much.
No worries. We got to share the love. Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah, and I'm a lecturer in youth and community work at Wrexham University.
Happy days. And Gavin with the green background.
Hi, I'm Gavin Breen, and I'm a youth worker from Monmouthshire Youth Service.
Cool. So it's happened, isn't it? So on the 7th of May this year, we had the Senedd election, but obviously prior to all of that. It was obviously Leonard Morgan, who was the First Minister, would announce that the government is sort of shut down. There would be a stage of pre-election period, which is people going out and canvassing and things like that, getting, their votes to where they want to be. So each party would have their own sort of campaign package available. So that pre-election period happens right to the point of the elections. But during that point, obviously, Welsh Government, with the elected members, sort of ceases to exist from that point onwards. So they're no longer a government. What happens during that period is the officials will sort of carry on with the work behind the back sort of screen and keep the structure sort of going. But during that time, no elective member would be able to make any decisions and things like that, because it could impact the election results and things like that. So that happened. And then on the 7th, people made their way to their nearest polling station to cast their votes. And I think it's worth saying that this election's been quite different, isn't it? So I was one of the ones that voted. I thought it was quite a straightforward process in Wales. You sort of turn up. You don't even need your polling cards in Wales, but you do for the central government elections. You can just turn up, tell them your name, they sort of cross it off. You go into your little booth, put the X where you need it to go to, and then you pop it in the little box, and then you're done. Which is good. But yeah, I thought it was quite straightforward this time round. Whereas before you'd sort of have numerous votes on the Senedd elections, but this time you sort of vote one. And depending on where you are based, there will be a list of different candidates. But obviously we've got main sort of parties, but this year is slightly different. Whereas before we had to sort of clear two front runners, didn't we? So if you cast your eyes back to the first, the last Senedd election before the changes happened, the sort of clear ones were sort of Labour, Welsh Labour and Welsh Conservatives. But this time it's completely different, isn't it? So this year we've got 96 seats rather than 60, which sort of, it's around the sort of the proportional representation, similar to how Scotland's model works, isn't it? But here in Wales, obviously a bit of a smaller area. We've got more candidates and more elected members across the whole of Wales. So just before I go on to the sort of breakdown and things like that, so in your roles, guys, did you have to sort of prepare young people? I know that obviously they can vote at the age of 16. What sort of conversations were you having, and what sort of things were people speaking to you about? Or was it that not many people sort of knew what they were voting for? Would they vote the same as their parents and things like that?
Yeah, so I think, excuse me, so when I'm not lecturing in youth and community work, I am working in youth work. So working in clubs with young people and having these conversations. And I think that what's really interesting is that young people want political education. They're saying they want that through formal education, they want that through informal education, but it doesn't seem to always be so readily available to them. And sometimes it can feel for young people that it's come a little bit too late. So it's like, okay, well, the vote might be next week or a month before, however long you're having them conversations around. Young people who maybe are in households where those conversations aren't taking place, don't have any information really, and others maybe who do feel like the only information they get is kind of one-sided. So it's a bit like, where does that, how do we remain, if you like, sort of apolitical? How does that information sort of get transferred? How do young people learn that? And also, young people will say they're not the only ones that need political education. There are many people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s who maybe also don't have access to neutral political education. So it isn't necessarily just something that affects young people, but
Yeah.
often if you like, the comments that are made are, oh, if young people are going to be voting, how do they know what they know? How does anyone know what they know? You could
Yeah.
argue. So I think that was a really important conversation. I think it's important to discuss, so for me, as a woman, we will talk about, when there was a time when women couldn't vote, for
Yeah.
example. So, it's really important, I think, to sort of look at the history of voting, what it means and what it means to young people, what matters to young people, how else do you have your say? And I
Yeah.
think it's a difficult sometimes road to navigate, because youth work is political in the
Yeah.
sense that, everything that happens, how young people get to their club, whether they are, accessing the same as maybe their friends can access, are they getting meals when they're in school? Do they have the opportunity of looking for work when they would like to? So all those things that affect young people, are political. Just sometimes I think young people can feel a bit out of that loop because
Mm.
it feels quite big. It feels really daunting to go and put your name next to, cross next to somebody's name when you actually, or a party, when you don't actually understand kind of the full context of that decision you're making.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and I think it's no going back as well, isn't it? Once it's gone through that box, you can't ask for it back. It's sealed. That's it. You've casted your vote,
Yeah.
which can be quite a daunting thing as well. And I think the good thing about sort of those booths is private as well. You could sort of be outwardly saying that I'm going to vote for a certain thing, and then go to your booth and go with your gut, I suppose, or what your heart believes in. So for you, Beth and Gav, obviously you work as well more sort of in the community base as well, I suppose. Whereas Sarah, because where you're a lecturer, your main job is working with adults, isn't it? I think it's fair to
Yeah.
say they're 18 plus, they've gone to university, they're choosing youth work as a career, which is a bonus, by the way. Having similar sort of conversations with students. I know you're quite new to the role, but what was the conversations like?
I think again, it's often students on youth and community work, the course, not always, but often are already in employment, aren't they? They are
Yeah,
practicing youth workers, if you like, and they're developing now their sort of skills to become professionals. So often it's sort of that two hats, isn't it? It's well, an employment point of view, I can't necessarily, not can't have an opinion, but I mean, I'm
yeah,
working sort of to represent, everybody. So it's sometimes hard to think, how does that impact me? And from a university, if you like, perspective, from a studying point of view, from somebody that is going through that critical sort of process of learning and thinking and starting to develop, it's really about what happens next and how does that impact youth work. Firstly, how does it
yeah,
impact us as professionals? But then also in turn, how does that impact the practice that I'm doing, which is
yeah,
working with young people? So from a lecturing, if you like, perspective, the conversations are around, I can't afterwards say, oh, well, I wish this was the set system if you didn't go and vote in the first place. So there's
yeah,
kind of that argument, isn't there, around, you've got to have a voice, whether or not what comes next is
yeah,
what you wanted. We live in a democratic society, that's sort of what happens next. But at least if you've had a say, you can always stand by your sort of decision of saying, well, this is how I feel. This is what I feel is right for, for me as an individual, for me as a professional, and me as a community. We have lots of identities, don't we, that sort of cross
yeah,
sort of each other. But usually, I would say, youth workers kind of know their political standpoint, and it's sort of standing by that, isn't it? And being, sort of happy with that decision that you've made, really. So yeah, the conversations I think are always around, is youth work sort of political in a big P sense, or is it political in a
yeah,
little P sense? And I don't think there's any sort of shying away from that we have to acknowledge that, we live in a world where politics matters. It matters to youth work because what happens to young people matters to us.
yeah.
Therefore, it's that sort of cyclical situation we find ourselves in, isn't it?
Yeah, and what you're saying in terms of like, youth work being political, we know firsthand that it's political because obviously recently we've had the definition of youth work that's been changed, isn't it?
Yeah.
Linked to the Learning and Skills Act. So legally and politically, it does massively impact youth work. And like you said, there's no avoiding it. And
No,
whether that's you're working for local government or local authorities, it will also impact the voluntary sector as well.
absolutely.
That there's no escaping that. Literally, so you got Wrexham, that was obviously north, top of Wales. Then you got Monmouthshire, probably the furthest south of Wales now, isn't it? You're literally on the border between yourselves and England. within spitting distance, you
Yeah.
know, and you're also working in a youth centre that's, you know, well, in the heart of Monmouth, isn't it? So what's been the conversations like with you guys and with your colleagues and with young people, and, you know, how's that?
It's been a really interesting time, I think. Generally, the centres that I work at are sort of your 14, 15-year-olds, but we do have quite a cohort of 16 plus.
Yeah.
So the first thing I noticed, which I was a little surprised by, was that a lot of them didn't realise there was a vote. So I spent a lot of my time actually helping young people sign up onto the electoral register. So they were like, "How do I do it? What do I do?"
Yeah.
So spent time doing that, and then yeah, it was just sort of having open discussions about what each party was trying to represent, because it's really, as a youth worker, obviously you need to be apolitical. I do have my personal preferences, obviously, but I just sort of put across, you know, like I had the people's manifestos out. I was like, we can look through them, we can have a
Yeah.
chat. There were a lot of good websites where you could sort of input your opinion, like what's your view on this? It would ask you a few questions and it would say, oh, you're most likely aligned to this political party. So we did a bit of that, but I think it's chatting about how young people vote and what their feelings are on things. I think a lot of the ones I was speaking to were feeling uninformed
Mm.
and unable to like make a decision. So they would tend to lean back to sort of what their parents were voting for
Yeah.
or friends. Because I mean, there was a couple of groups of them that were among friendship groups saying like, "Oh, I'm going to vote for this. I'm going to vote for that." So it was interesting hearing their perspectives, but it was also great to be able to challenge a couple of points where I thought, "Oh, maybe this is a bit wrong. Let's have a look at it." So yeah, it's just been. I think it's been a learning experience for everyone, and it's for us as well as professionals on
Mm.
how we can best help and guide them to make the decision that's best for them.
You picked on a good point, and I'm going to come back to it later about, like, you know, where to go for information, and sometimes there's sort of mis and disinformation that sometimes you might have to research and sort of get into. But actually, Monmouthshire is going through quite a weird sort of stage, really, isn't it? Because obviously it's Savannah and Torfaen, which is Monmouthshire and Torfaen together, two sort of really different counties, isn't it? So Torfaen being very very surprised, very similar to in East Newport and things like that. But Monmouthshire is seen as that sort of more affluent. But I've just looked at the, you know, in terms of what's being voted for in Monmouthshire, and you got two from Reform, two from Plaid Cymru, one from Welsh Conservatives and one from Labour. And what's interesting about that is Monmouthshire was always very much conservative heartland, you know, and it started to change. I think it started to change in the general election, obviously, where it moved from blue to solid red. And I wonder if the sort of culture's changing slightly in Monmouthshire. I don't know, because you've worked in Monmouthshire for, you know, a fair while.
14 years now, but
Yeah,
I
what have you noticed a change, or is it sort of, you know, culturally? How does it look? How does it feel?
it feels different since Labour took power. I mean, there's a lot you could say about obviously like Westminster, Keir Starmer,
Yeah,
and things like that. But um, I think people are sort of fed up of what's been going on. You know, like things, we're putting a new name on it, but things are sort of the same. And I think what I've noticed as well, particularly from like the male side of things,
yeah,
there's that sort of anti-establishment vote
yeah,
where they're moving towards the more right wing, like the manosphere stuff I'm seeing with young boys, young men,
yeah,
and a lot of that stuff online is just geared, is aimed at them, isn't it? Like it's
yeah,
hard to get out of it. If you've clicked one, just out of curiosity, you'll have it on your feed forever. So they're hearing all of this stuff from these influencers, and yeah. So, but that obviously that's just like a male point of view. But I think overall it's sort of just anti-establishment.
yeah,
Heard a lot of young people voting for Greens, a lot of young people voting Lib Dem. It's been a
yeah.
nice mix actually, but I haven't heard anyone say, "Yeah, I'm going to vote for Labour or Conservative" in Monmouthshire. Nobody.
Yeah, that's the bit that's changed, really, isn't it? It's huge, and I don't know, Beth, for you, your organisations, your sort of main effort is to end youth homelessness, isn't it, in Wales? Clearly, because you work for End Youth Homelessness Cymru, which does what it says
That's
on
what
the
it says
tin.
on the tin.
Yeah, you know, but what's it been like for you guys? You know, and have people shared their sort of political stances on things, and or how's it impacted you guys? And like, you know, yeah, what's that sort of looking like?
Yeah, so the work I do with young people obviously the young people I work with, most of them have experienced homelessness. A lot of them have
Yeah.
been through like the care system, and they, as a result, are very politically engaged.
Yeah.
The young people I work with specifically are maybe more politically engaged than your average young person, maybe. And that's obviously fantastic.
Yeah.
So rather than kind of how we approached it for the election was rather than looking at specific parties and asking them kind of how they plan to vote or whatever, we sort of looked at issues and we
Yeah.
sort of asked them, what are the key issues that are most important to you right now as a young person, and what do you want to see the next Welsh government, whoever it may be, what do you
Yeah.
want to see them working on? So I chaired those conversations and we sort of whittled them down to like 5 key things, which I can obviously go through. But I think, yeah, as you said, there's been a big change. I think Gavin's point about this sort of gender divide, I've definitely seen that with young
Okay.
boys going a little bit more to the right and maybe young
Yeah.
girls going more to the left, which I think is really interesting. And obviously the role of social media and, like Gavin alluded to, the manosphere and so on is you can't really underplay that in the sort of anti-establishment vote.
Yeah.
But I think despite whether they're leaning more towards the left or the right or wherever, I think, at least in my experience with these young people, the issues that they're concerned about are fundamentally the same.
Yeah.
They're worried about the cost of living, they're worried about getting a job, they're worried about transport, mental health support. Like, regardless of how they vote, they want to see the same kind of action. They're worried about the same problems, and they want to see the Welsh government address those problems,
Yeah. I think, is it fair to say that they sort of want change and they want it now? And
Yeah.
when it happens slowly, it can be frustrating.
Yeah, definitely. I think, again, especially young people who have like been really disadvantaged and have, been through homelessness and
Mm.
poverty, they are very aware of like things are broken, the systems aren't working, they're not
Yeah.
working for young people, they're not really working for anyone. And I think, yeah, there's 100% this huge appetite for change, which is probably why, and that's not just true of young people, because in general across the electorate, we've seen, as we've said, this massive shift from,
Yeah.
Labour versus Tories to now kind of Plaid versus Reform as the two biggest parties. There's clearly an appetite for a change of direction.
Yeah.
And I think that's true of young people and of adults as well, to be honest.
I was working with young people this weekend, volunteering, and someone said that it feels like Brexit all over again. Um,
Mm.
Actually, I didn't actually think of it that way, but I suppose it does, doesn't it? Because it's quite big change in a small amount of time, isn't it?
And I think, excuse me, sorry, I think where that takes us to is, when we're talking about sort of political education and what that means, they always say, don't speak about, religion or politics or,
Yeah.
even music choices or your football team, if you don't want to fall out with somebody. So I think that, it's actually very true that, we know that when, the conversations around Brexit, when that was coming, families fell out, people fell out
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
literally stopped speaking to each other as a result of it. And that's the concern here is that, young people can have very different opinions. So, for example, the LGBTQI plus community are most likely to vote one way or another
Yeah.
simply because of a party that may or may not support, or they would perceive it to be supporting their lives,
Yeah.
literally their lives in some cases. So that's an example where somebody else, another young person in a friendship group or group, might say, actually, this is my political persuasion because, this
Yeah.
is what I believe, this is what I stand for, and I want this to happen. Often you can have complete polar opposites of opinions, but young people can obviously still be getting on. They still become part of the same friendship group and have some
Yeah.
similarities, but other things that are very significant and important to them as individuals can shape, obviously, the way that they would vote or not, as the case may be. Just to pick up on Bethan's point, I've worked with young people before experiencing homelessness, experiencing substance misuse, experiencing any, sort of, real sort of, and find themselves in real sort of situations of either poverty or deprivation, as that might be, often would be the young people that would feel like nobody can answer this for me, so therefore I'm not going to vote at all, which is
Yeah.
the worst position we can find ourselves in, when actually young people are saying it's completely hopeless, I don't know what to do about this. We've got the Greta Thunbergs of the world, who are young
Yeah.
people saying, listen to us, we're crying
Yeah.
out, we want the world to be better, we're literally, burning ourselves alive, so to speak.
Yeah.
So, when you have voices like that, people who are really passionate and want to get themselves heard and want other people to listen and take
Mm.
notice of that, it can be really sort of disheartening if young people feel like, but nobody listened to me, nobody
Yeah,
heard what I had to say, or I don't, like you've said before, actually, I know Gavin said it, I don't even know how to vote, and I might be from a non-voting family, so therefore
yeah,
nobody is saying go out and have a say. I come from generations of people that just feel this isn't for us, so it can feel elitist, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say, and it shouldn't. But I guess there are young people who will feel that, they will sort of carry that burden of this, that somebody else is going to fix this somehow. It's not for me. It's not a conversation I can have. Yet young people are really political at the same
yeah,
time. Everything they're
yeah,
talking about is actually, they have a really strong viewpoint on lots and lots of things, whether that is, have they got a local skate park that they want to go and hang out in at the weekend? Have they got safe places? Can they walk down the street? Can they walk
yeah,
home actually on their own and not be fearful for their lives?
yeah,
Is their identity celebrated or respected, or sort of, do they feel included in their community, for
yeah,
example? Just some of the things that only young people speak about. And that's, I think, the issue, like you said, feeling a little bit like the sort of Brexit conversation. The worry is this going to divide? Is this new way of politics, which feels quite new in the sense that it's really fragmented, is that a good thing? Is a question I suppose I'm posing. And sorry, Dan,
yeah,
what's that going to be? Questions that make it there.
yeah.
But is it a good thing, or is it gonna divide us? I guess is the big question, isn't it?
Yeah, you have taken. Yeah, that is a good question. Actually, do you want a job? But that is a good question, isn't it? It's that sort of that two-party political system isn't there. Well, it's broken, isn't it? Let's be
Yeah.
honest. We're seeing that not just in Wales. We're seeing it all across the UK, aren't we? And here in Wales, obviously, we've opted for proportional representation. That was voted in a fair while back. Can't remember when. But obviously, that's the direction we're going in. I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. But I suppose only time will tell now, will it? We don't actually know if that's going to be a good thing or a bad thing. But I think one of the points that I picked up on is that sort of that polarization that we're sort of experiencing at the moment, isn't it? It's that if I don't agree with you, I must sort of, we really got to hate each other almost. And I don't know whether that's just how politics is designed. And when you look in almost outwardly, because politics can sometimes look like a goldfish bowl, can't it? You can see what you can see on the TV. And if you look at the House of Commons, if you like, you have literally got a left and a right within the room, haven't you? And obviously with the Welsh Senedd, slightly different sort of viewpoint. I know the building itself is changing to sort of reflect the sort of more seats and things like that. But you can see the sort of bickering between the politicians back and forth. But probably what you don't see is that they work together on many committees, probably generate consensus, actually get on with each other, probably sit with each other and have a coffee at dinner. They don't actually have to hate each other. They just have a point of view, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know? So I find that bit really interesting that, and you see it like on this, like, when they walk down the cenotaph on Remembrance Sunday and you actually see them like walking and talking to each other. It sort of looks weird, doesn't it? 'Cause you think the way they argue with each other, it's like when you're in school, isn't it? And you argue with your best friend and all your friends pick a sides, and it can sort of feel like that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But,
Just like that
And
with
that, I suppose, sorry,
oh,
I
go
was just going to say that just feels so outside of young people's norms, doesn't it? Like you just said, Darryl, whether it's, sat in a circular room having debates across the room from each other, or having that sort of left and right as we see in sort of UK government. Young people don't communicate like that, do they? Most of us actually in society don't communicate like that. We wouldn't, sort of form a very formal sort of setting to have that sort of debate and conversation. So I think if things don't feel relatable, it's hard to relate
yeah,
then, isn't it? If the topics they're discussing are relevant to your life, you've seen something very visual that is just not anything that looks like anything you would ever engage in. And that's, I suppose, a lot of the time is, young people don't have access to that sort of environment. So
yeah, yeah. Sorry, Gav. What was you going to say then?
I was just going to say that I think this is a problem not just for young people, but many adults I know about being able
Yeah,
to disagree with other people and still get on. It's quite a skill to pick up, isn't it? It's taken me a long time to be able to handle that in an appropriate way, like 'cause I've been dipping in and out trying to get my master's in youth work done, and the amount of critical conversations, discussions, and thought you have to go through, and there could be somebody sat across, and I just completely disagree with what you say, but you're able to have that conversation and you've got that platform and the safety to do so, where I don't feel like there's necessarily that available to everyone, or people just don't know how to handle it.
yeah.
It is difficult even within my family, like there's people that
Mm.
have definitely voted in ways I disagree with, but we can still get on, still like it. just disagree with what they think about how to. We all want the same thing, I think, don't we? We all want everyone to be happy, healthy, safe, and however we go about doing that, like the people have different points of view, don't they? So
Yeah.
yeah,
And we all see the world differently, don't we? It's hard. Like I've got it in my house. It's we're probably in that sort of polarization. I voted one way. My partner's voting the other way. My kids are too young to vote, but if they did, they'd probably just pick a color that they liked. At that point, it's hard, isn't it? And I think one of the things I'm picking up on is that we need to probably have these conversations like at a really young age and normalize. I always remember my nan used to say to me, "There's two things you don't talk about, and that's politics and money." And now we're sort of switching that, and we probably should be talking about politics a lot more because it massively impacts them, and it's such a big thing, isn't it? And so how do we get young people sort of talking, but also how do we get them to walk away from the argument knowing that we have to just agree to disagree? What is it to do,
I
I
think
think
that's why like youth work in general is so important though, because I think a lot of what youth work is about giving young people those skills and,
Yeah.
empowering them to be able to voice their opinions and listen to other people's opinions. And as youth workers, we are kind of there to like mediate those conversations, I suppose, and with the hopes that we can empower them to be adults who are capable of, having those kinds of conversations without youth workers there to mediate them. But I think,
Yeah.
and again, as we've alluded to, youth work is so political, it's so important. And in the current kind of climate where public services are constantly being cut and we're all, under resourced and underpaid and one thing and another. But I think that like the power and the importance of youth work is quite self-evident, when you
Yeah.
when you talk to young people. And obviously we're obviously going to say that as people who are youth workers and who work in that sector
Yeah.
think. And I think as well, it's like it's almost like politics has like an image problem, you know what I mean? People, it does have this image, as we've said, of elitism, and it's not relatable. And that's one of the things that I personally think is really positive about the Senedd compared to Westminster, is that
Mm,
it's not as elite. It's not, most of the members of the Senedd are people were from the communities they're
yeah.
representing and who care about those communities rather than, I think Westminster is just generally a much more elite, nobody in the Senedd went to Oxbridge,
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
it's, and I think that's something that's really positive. I think it's more relatable than like UK level politics personally. And I think another positive thing about this election as well is that with the increased number of members, there's quite a few new members been elected who are under 30 or who are maybe just 30 in their
Yeah.
early 30s. And I think that's fantastic for young people to have somebody representing them that's a little bit closer to them in age and maybe understands their experiences a bit more than somebody a bit older might, I think that's a really
Yeah.
positive thing as well.
I think, we got to, oh, yeah, I think you're right. We've got to celebrate where we've actually come from, isn't it? Because, you know, yes, Aline Morgan lost a seat, and that's really, I'm really sad for her in the sense of that, it must have been really hard to take because she was the first minister, but she was also the first female first minister that Wales had as well. So I think we are very progressive. I think we've got more of a relationship to our government than we probably might have had in if we was to be living in England, because they've got obviously members of parliament. I know they've got some devolution, but I feel as if we've fully devolved here in Wales. So it can feel like you can access a politician quicker. And I'm not sure if that's a thing now, be really good to hear from you guys in terms of now that there are, from 60 to 96, do you think there would be better access to speaking to your politicians? And do you think that might, generate more, change or sort of, more in our favor? We can have those conversations more accessibly.
I think that depends on them. I think that in all honesty, I think that depends on those 96 individuals and how
Yeah.
accessible they make themselves. Because actually, there is no point somebody sat in an office or having a surgery once a week or once a fortnight or whatever they choose to do, and no one knowing how to access them.
Yeah.
Because again, like I said before, anybody, but specifically young people, will only know what they know. So actually, it could be that they didn't have a clue before who was potentially, a candidate in their area. They don't know now there's somebody in, or they might know a name, but they don't really know how to access
Yeah.
that support or information or whatever it is they're expecting from them. And I think that although we've come a long way, we think we still really have to be really mindful of the fact that the percentage of people voting is still really, really low.
It is. Yeah.
Not only in Wales, but also across the UK. And actually, I know that the Electoral Commission in March, when they did some research, was saying that actually here in Wales, some of young people are actually some of the lowest likely to vote. So
Yeah.
there is still things that we're doing not very well. I think we have to sort of
Yeah.
acknowledge that,
Yeah, of
that,
course.
we're nowhere near, a healthy percentage, if you like, of voting, because what we've got is actually quite a low percentage of people that vote. So of that percentage, if you say, well, so many voted this and so many voted
Yeah.
that, it's still such a low percentage of the actual
Yeah, you are
society,
right.
So I think actually, so what that means is there are lots of other people out there that obviously have opinions, but
Yeah.
they haven't been logged anywhere. Nobody recorded that opinion and preference, if you like. So is the current state of affairs a true reflection of what people actually believe in Wales? I think that's a difficult one to know.
Yeah.
And in terms of access to their represented, member of the Senedd now, that will be my hope, is that those 96 make themselves accessible. So that's their responsibility to do that, isn't it? That ultimately.
Yeah. Yeah. I suppose one of the things you pointed out is the sort of, the turnout, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah.
But in Wales, it's actually higher percentage than England at the moment in terms of the UK general election, because Wales was on a downward trajectory from the sort of voter turnout on the general election. Just had a look at some of the statistics here. 2021, it was 46.6, and 2026 is 51.6. Now, that might be because votes of 16 happened. I know they could happen in 2021, but also maybe they've gone into the swing of it. We still don't know the age breakdown at the moment, and that will come out in days to come.
And that's, I guess, the interesting bit, isn't it, Darryl, to see is there an increase? Because I think it was projected that it wouldn't be. I suppose this is what the reports were saying prior to the election, is
Yeah.
that there was a lot of sort of talk around, the or the likelihood to go and vote, at that point. But hopefully, there's been some shifting and some work was done around, like, 'cause that was it, obviously in March. That was before, there was a good couple of months there, wasn't there, to hopefully increase that, and it has increased, which is positive. But
Yeah.
we'd like it to be higher, wouldn't we? Even, and that's like you say, it's still positive that there's been an increase. But how do
Yeah.
we
Well,
get it
it's
to?
interesting, isn't it? Because there are other countries that they sort of I suppose not an incentive, but it's mandatory voting, isn't it? In places like Australia and things
Yeah,
like that, which obviously then people might form a view on that. Obviously, everyone tries to get 100% turnout, don't they? It's
yeah,
it's a big thing. But like you said, that's just over half of people who have registered to vote. And as you know, that not everyone registers to vote. Obviously, a large proportion of people to do it, because when you register to vote, you don't just register to vote, but it helps you sort of apply for a mortgage and things like that, and it heightens your credit score and things like that. Which sometimes, I used to work in the sort of employability area of youth work at one stage, and one of the things I tried to do is when they were sort of going from 17 to 18, said, right, get yourself on the electoral roll, and they was, I'm not interested in voting, but actually, if you want a decent credit score later on in life, get yourself onto that. And every time you move home, make sure you keep re-registering. And that's the important thing, isn't it? It's that sort of the added benefits to that. And I'm not sure why it does give you a better chance of a mortgage, especially because young people are not likely to get a mortgage until their 30s these days, because the house prices obviously rocketed and things like that, which is beyond their control. It is an interesting concept, but I just had a look as well, because local government is on a downward trajectory, and I'm wondering now when the next local government, that's your councils, your 22 councils in Wales. I wonder if we can sort of anticipate that might sort of go on an upwards trajectory. And I don't know whether, given that I think this election I think it's felt different for me anyway. Felt that there's been a lot of messaging out there, isn't it? So if you think of it before, you just see those placards in people's gardens. You might get I just remember you'd be in the street playing and you hear the people going around in the vans with the megaphones and things like that. You don't really get that anymore. It's all pretty much on our handheld devices and things like that. Just looking at some of the scoring here, as we know, for listeners and viewers who are going to be listening to this or watching this, hopefully, Plaid Cymru are the largest party, but actually they're not the majority, are they? So it's a no majority situation. To get a majority, you needed 49 seats, which means that you can safely make a decision and a vote, and then you won't get any sort of opposition for that. So you've got 43 seats for Plaid Cymru, and it's likely that they will form the next government, and Rhun ap Iorwerth will be the First Minister for Plaid Cymru. The first political change in Wales is Reform UK, who will probably form the official opposition as being the second largest party, and they're at 34 seats. And I find it really interesting that no Reform didn't exist in the last election, really. besides a few defections to reform in the previous government, it's a massive increase in there. And I'm not sure if that's reflective of the sort of narrative that's going on at the moment. You know, are people looking for, change, and they see these two outlets thinking, okay, maybe we'll see change quicker. It's a hard one, but it's worth noticing. Welsh Labour, who obviously would be the controlling party since the Senate's establishment, they've got 9 seats. 9 seats. It's
I think that's part of the reason, a big part of the reason why there's been an increase in turnout in this election is because I think every previous Senedd election, it felt inevitable. You knew Welsh Labour was going to
yeah,
win. There wasn't an anticipation that there was going to be a major change in government. But obviously in this election, there was a new system.
yeah,
We could see in the polls that Welsh Labour weren't likely to win the election. So there's this sense of it's not as predictable as previous elections have been. So I think
yeah,
that motivates people to go out and vote more,
yeah.
than the idea of, well, it doesn't matter how I vote, it's probably going to be Labour anyway, which I think was probably the attitude in every Senate election up until this one.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think a lot of people, I think it boils down to change. I know I keep saying this. I think it does boil down to change. People really want to see it happening quickly. I think some of the things that's happening at the moment in terms of I think the biggest thing is I have a view that the cost of living crisis has always been a cost of living crisis. And I also believe that the reason it's becoming more of an issue is because it's started to go up the classes now. That's my personal view, is that I come from a very deprived area of East Newport. My street alone was probably the most deprived in my sort of immediate area. And you sort of could see poverty everywhere, couldn't you? And I think people thought that, voting Labour would be is for the working people and things like that. But you're starting to see that even your more sort of affluent or middle affluent areas are starting to think, well, I am really struggling here right now. I think someone who grew up in my estate would it almost be inevitable thinking that, yeah, you're going to struggle because maybe you don't have a high paying job, you maybe can't even get a job, you've had low academic aspirations and things like that. But I think the reason things are changing at the moment is starting to go up the classes, and pretty much, I know that's pretty controversial to say, but I think now that's why people are making decisions that are slightly goes against the sort of status quo, isn't it? Because in the UK, at least, as in Wales and England, would always be a two-party system. Scotland's somewhat different in there. Obviously, they have the Scottish National Party, controlling party in Holyrood. But that's been the status quo for many years, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think what you're saying is it's interesting, Darryl, isn't it, that actually there is sort of this shift in political viewpoints, whether it's sort of to the right, to the left, or sort of somewhere in between, or what people are hoping for, the ruling party or anybody actually who's making decisions almost on our behalf, to remember that actually these, elected members represent us, so that their job is to represent what we want to happen. And for young people, lots and lots of young people, majority, I would argue that I know at least, really care about their environment locally and globally for that
Yeah,
matter. They really care about whether or not they can afford to go to university to study, whether they've got a safe home that they can live in, whether there's food on the table for them and their
yeah,
families, whether there's going to be an option if they wanted to think about buying something, somewhere to live if they wanted to in the future, and around, their mental health. Young people since COVID are really, I think, we're in a time where we're far more willing to speak about this than we ever have been before. What young people are saying is, we need help and support with this.
yeah,
We need a safe way out. We need to know that we can turn to somebody for help if we need it. We need to know that, if we need to access specialist services, they're going to be there for us. Like the young people Beth Ann will work with, they need to know that, are they in appropriate housing? If they can't live at home, is the housing that they're being offered safe and secure? And there's going to be an option for them to move on and live independently at some point, So these issues, I think, that really matter to young people, what they will have said is, I haven't felt there's been an answer before. Now maybe there is. Now I'm hearing more, whether it's true information or not, is the issue, but
yeah,
there is information out there regardless, isn't it? And that's it. I think the hard thing from our point of view as youth workers, it's making sure that we're fishing through the sort of sea of information that young people
yeah,
provided, and be able to say, well, actually, let's have a really informed discussion about this. So if you're saying that, you're really concerned about, you're 16 now, you're really concerned about what's going to happen post, studies, let's have a look at what matters to you. Who do you think is out there that represents your viewpoint? because actually what if, as Gavin's alluded to already, if young people are sort of turning to influencers, etc., for those answers, they're not necessarily finding a viewpoint that is completely unbiased. They're finding a
Yeah.
viewpoint that is very biased. So there, I think from a youth work perspective, it's really important that we're sort of able to sort of hold that safe space for young people to have those conversations, and not 1 month or 2 months or 3 months before the election happens, which I think is sometimes what happens. Is right, everyone, let's stop talking about political education. It needs to be happening now. It needs to be consistent now, so that when there are local elections or the next, elections for the Senedd for that matter, and people are actively prepared for that, and then we've made sure there
Yeah.
was space for that to happen. Feels sometimes a little bit like rushed, doesn't it? It feels like, we're all saying we spoke to young people that didn't even know that they could register to vote and or were eligible and or that there was even a vote happening. So why on earth since they were, old enough to be thinking about these conversations, as Darryl, you've already alluded to, those conversations clearly weren't happening in the right spaces, and that's on us as youth workers, it's on formal educators, it's on, everybody, it's on a community, it takes a village, doesn't it, to get this right.
Yeah.
So I think that, that's across the board. To be more active, I guess, in our conscious decisions, to have conversations about things that matter to young people.
Yeah, I think you're right, actually, in terms of like it takes, many people to sort of raise that aspiration in terms of that sort of political awareness. I think it's worth mentioning that in Wales we've got a curriculum for curriculum for education, curriculum for Wales, and it's fairly recent, isn't it? It went for a review, and now part of that was the sort of the outside your academic, topics that you would normally cover in school, like your mandatory stuff, like your English, math and science and geography, history, all that type of stuff. But actually, I think it's a really tough one, because I think if I was a maths teacher or a geography teacher, my job is to teach maths and geography. That's what I've done my degree in. That's what I'm comfortable in. And I think sometimes there's this expectation that if you got a form class, that you would have those conversations. But are you prepared for those conversations if you're a teacher teaching, a subject? So I do form the view that, youth workers who have that sort of informal informal relationship, and it's based on the voluntary relationship as well, probably better place to have those conversations. We recently run some training on, you know, engaging with young people politically and how to have those conversations. And actually, it just goes back down to our values and sort of standards that we hold ourselves within youth and community work wider. But one of the things I want to sort of chat about is around sort of mis and disinformation, because I think this has been huge. I think, something that you can probably get away with quicker and easier online. And Gav, I'm going to come to you on this one, because you alluded to this earlier, in terms of you almost have to sort of clear the muddy water for a young person to sort of get them to the point that they can make an actual decision, or even just form a view, I suppose. But, was that something you had a lot when working in your youth centres or youth provisions? Did you have that sort of those conversations? I mean, where are you getting this information? This is ludicrous type of thing. I seen it as an adult. It was loads, isn't it?
It's rife, isn't it? And I think it's been prevalent since Brexit. Well, since before Brexit, but in recent times, where I just think of that bus travelling round. Was it
Yeah.
330 million a month or whatever it was into NHS, which never appeared? It's parties are able to just barefaced lie now and get away with it. It breeds distrust, doesn't it? And I think modern politics now has moved into a space where parties are just trying to persuade people by like competing for attention rather than actually talking about the policy. Like, I saw a couple of parties stuff come through the post, and they were just saying, just don't vote for this party, vote for us, because we just don't want them in. Like, they're leading with like emotion and identity. They're not really talking about like the issues as such. It's turning into a different way of getting your point across. Because I think about the young people that are eligible to vote now, that have voted. Think about what they've been through in the last few years. Like, if you just go back to COVID, Brexit, all this sort of instability in their lives, and how they live their lives as well. They're online all the time, and now with AI becoming more prevalent, and it's getting really hard to tell whether something you're watching is AI. Things are being generated by AI as well. It's really hard to figure that out. So you need to have like trusted news sources, and then it's whether people are really bothered that much, whether they you could just read something at a glance and be like, oh, okay. And then you take that in, you're not really thinking or criticizing where that's coming from. So yeah, it's just interesting how they were promoting themselves to young people, because I don't think the young people were necessarily going to be getting those leaflets through the door, were they? It would be their parents or carers. Yeah.
In an ideal world, when they had the leaflets, and if they didn't want to recycle them, not just put them in the general waste. Which is no, but you're right in it, because a young person's less likely to read a leaflet. I've always known that. Try and get a young person to do a survey is hard enough, let alone read a leaflet. But if it's attached to their phone, it's normally a lot easier. In terms of like the mis and disinformation, and what is, if you were speaking to another youth worker or someone going through training, or or aspiring to a career in youth work, what advice would you give to them to have those conversations, and how they would go about, breaking down the barriers in terms of the, mis and disinformation? Where do they get trusted information from?
There's loads of places. I mean, I think Google are doing a good job at the moment. They have like fact checkers. I think
Yeah,
it was X was doing it as well for a bit, where they were having community notes as well, where people could weigh in. But I think as a youth work professional, my honest answer to all young people and my colleagues is always that I never know 100%. I'm always open to hear an alternative, or things can be wrong. It might be right at the time that you're reading it, but it could be wrong the next day. So, I mean, there are lists of websites, and there's quite a few you can go to check news sources, but it's doing your own research. If you care enough about the subject, it's going and figuring it out for yourself, because if you find a point of view for something, I'm sure you can find somewhere online that would agree with you.
yeah.
That's the great thing and the awful thing about the internet, isn't it? It's so vast. If you wanted to find out about anything, you'll find somebody that has the same point of view as you. So it's knowing where those trusted sources are, and a lot of people, and like news sources nowadays, a lot of them aren't as trusted as they used to be, because they are sort of
Yeah.
proliferating a lot of the misinformation that's coming out.
And some take a view, don't they? I think it's fair to say. Obviously, the BBC, which is taxpayer funded, they can't take a view, and they independently should be able to sort of mediate between different narratives, but they're not allowed to take a view. Whereas you've got others that do, and I think that's just something that's always been a thing in our society, isn't it? And that, I think that can be a bit of a problem. I'm not sure if is it the same with you then.
You were asking me like where I actually go. I couldn't remember the name of it. I've had to just go onto my browser, of where I fact check things.
Yeah.
I don't know how to just like, do I just go back into saying it?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
So yeah, one of the good websites I use to go back and fact check things is called fullfact.org. That's a really great place to get fact checked information, and BBC Verify. Those are sort of the main places I would start. There are lots of other places to go, but those are the main ones I sort of use when I'm talking with young people.
With you, Bethan, what is it, similar sort of thing to what Gavin's experienced, in terms of there is so much information to wade through. Where do you begin with those conversations? How on earth do you wade through all the sort? It's almost like seeing the wood through the trees, isn't it? How do you do that? Yeah, 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 yeah. I think you're right. I think, like you said, it's having those conversations. It's having it's sort of that fact check, and all that type of stuff. But we got to draw the line at some stage. At the end of the day, they will sort of leave our company, our provision, or whatever that we're sort of running, and they go and make their own decision. It's about sort of providing what you can provide at that point, isn't it? That point of delivery. I think when I was doing my level 3, this was quite a few years ago, and it was who was getting elected at the time? I can't remember actually. It was quite a long time ago. A fair, nearly 20. And I done this activity where it was coming up. I can't remember what type of elections it was, but it was quite easy because there was only 4 parties at the time. And me and my colleague made these sort of like manifestos based on the information from political manifestos, and we had 4 parties. One was like the custard party. One was the pool cue party. I can't remember the other 2 names. They were like random names given to a party. And then we gave them to a young person to sort of be the elected person. They had to give a speech about their manifesto that was on the piece of paper. And then someone had to go and vote. And interestingly, at that time, obviously each of those parties had a political party that we've taken the information off. We told them at the end, the political parties that we had was obviously Labour, Conservative, and it was the Liberal Democrats, and it must have been the Green Party or something that was a sort of up there. And obviously Reform back then wasn't even heard of, or even UKIP at the time, which I know is a form which sort of come from Reform come from. Highest one voted, believe it or not, and I mean by a lot, was the Liberal Democrats with the young people. It's just it's crazy, isn't it? So yeah, but that was a helpful exercise. Look, we could probably talk all day about this and go round in circles, but no, it's been I think it's been a really fascinating conversation. To be honest with you, it's one of those ones that we probably need to do more of, isn't it? So no, I do appreciate your time with that. And as we draw to a close, one of the things I just wanted to remind everyone, if anyone's watching or listening, we have got currently a training and learning needs survey, which indicates to us any sort of particular training and learning needs within the sector, and which we will sort of analyse the results and work through, and then obviously that will form part of the training package. So if you have got 5 minutes, if you can do that, I would massively appreciate it. For anyone listening, if you can share it towards your colleagues. If you want to find out information about more training and things like that, then feel free to go onto our link tree. I'll put the descriptions in the description box, or wherever you see this too, whether it's social media or the actual show notes and things like that. Also, before you go, if you can like this, subscribe to it, I would be eternally thankful, because it helps us reach more people and also makes me look really popular as well, which, being colossal extrovert, clearly I love as well. So no, thank you to Bethan, Sarah and Gav for giving us a hand with the conversations. It's been really, really fascinating. I hope you've enjoyed it, and hopefully see you at the next.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks,
Cheers,
all.
everybody.